There is a moment in every man's life when a woman looks at him just for a second longer than expected, and he can feel that something is being decided, not about how he looks, not about what he says, something quieter than that, something he can't quite name but somehow knows is more important than anything he's been taught to focus on. Most men spend years trying to perfect the wrong things, the right words, the right confidence, the right amount of charm, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to grow in those areas. But what most people don't realize is that a mature woman, someone who has lived enough life to know the difference between performance and substance, is not evaluating any of that first. She's reading something underneath it. And once you understand what that something is, you start to see why so many men feel chosen in the beginning, only to be quietly forgotten later. Stay with me here because this is where things become interesting. Think about the difference between a man who walks into a room trying to be noticed and a man who walks into a room simply being himself, fully aware of who he is regardless of who's watching. On the surface, they might look similar. Both might be confident. Both might be well-spoken. But a woman who has been through enough relationships, enough disappointments, enough lessons about who people really are underneath their best behavior can sense the difference almost instantly. Not because she's judging him, because she's protecting herself. We'll come back to that. But before we go there, we need to understand something deeper about why this instinct exists in the first place. A woman who has matured emotionally has usually learned, sometimes through painful experience, that charm is cheap and consistency is rare. She has likely encountered men who said the right things in the beginning, men who knew exactly how to create a spark, but who couldn't sustain anything real once the initial excitement faded. So somewhere along the way, often without consciously deciding to, she stopped asking herself, is he exciting? And started asking, is he steady? This single shift in questioning changes everything about what she notices first. Now picture this. A man speaks to her, friendly, easygoing, maybe even a little flirtatious. Nothing unusual happens on the surface. But underneath, she's quietly observing something most men never think to manage. She's watching how he treats people who can't offer him anything. The waiter, the stranger who interrupts the conversation, the friend who isn't particularly impressive or important. This is not a test he knows he's taking, but it is one of the most revealing things he could ever show her. There is something deeper happening here, and it has to do with what emotional safety actually means to someone who has learned not to trust surface impressions. Consider the moment when a man is calm, not because nothing is happening, but because something is happening and he isn't reacting from fear. Most people associate masculinity with intensity, dominance, or control. But a mature woman has usually learned that those qualities, when unaccompanied by emotional regulation, lead to instability, not strength. What she's truly drawn to, often without fully articulating it even to herself, is a man who can hold tension without becoming reactive, a man whose mood doesn't dictate the emotional temperature of the room. This is the first thing she notices, long before chemistry, long before attraction takes shape into something nameable. She notices whether his presence creates calm or whether it creates unpredictability. And this matters more than almost anything else, because unpredictability, even when it's exciting in the beginning, eventually becomes exhausting to live inside of. Now we move deeper, because there's a second thing she's noticing, something even less visible than emotional steadiness. She's noticing whether he listens to understand her, or whether he listens to wait for his turn to speak. Imagine the subtle difference between a man who nods along, already thinking about his response, and a man who actually absorbs what she said before reacting to it. Most people don't think this distinction matters much in the early stages of attraction. But a woman who has been let down before knows that the way someone listens in the beginning is often the way they will listen for the rest of the relationship. If he can't be present with her words now, when everything is new and exciting, what happens later when life becomes complicated and attention becomes harder to give? What happens next is important, because this leads to something most people overlook entirely. She's also noticing how he handles being told no or being disagreed with. This might seem like a small detail, but it reveals an enormous amount about his emotional maturity. A man who becomes defensive, sulky, or subtly punishing when he doesn't get his way is showing her very early how conflict will be handled for as long as she stays with him. A man who can hear disagreement without taking it as a personal attack, who can hold his ground without becoming cold or controlling, is showing her something rare. He's showing her that her voice won't cost her his warmth. But here is what matters most, and this is where the deeper truth begins to surface. All of these things, emotional steadiness, genuine listening, grace under disagreement, kindness toward those who can't benefit him, are not separate traits. They are different expressions of the same underlying quality. They are all evidence of a man who is not performing his identity, but living from it. A mature woman isn't looking for perfection. She isn't looking for the most impressive man in the room. She's looking for evidence that who he is in front of her is who he actually is when no one is keeping score. This is the deepest insight beneath everything we've discussed. The question was never, how do I impress her? That question leads men toward performance, toward trying to become someone slightly more polished, slightly more confident, slightly more desirable than they actually feel inside. But performance is exhausting to maintain, and eventually, every performance reveals the person underneath it. The real question, the one that actually creates lasting attraction with a woman who has emotional depth, is this: who am I when I'm not trying to be chosen? Because that version of you, the one that exists without an audience, without an agenda, without the need to impress, is the version she's actually evaluating, whether you realize it or not. She isn't drawn to the man who knows how to capture attention. She's drawn to the man who doesn't need to perform to feel like enough. This changes everything about how you should think about growth. Instead of asking how to become more charming, more impressive, or more strategically appealing, the more powerful question becomes how to become someone whose calm, consistency, and character don't depend on being witnessed. Because the moment your sense of self stops requiring an audience, you stop performing identity and start embodying it. And that shift, subtle as it sounds, is the exact thing a mature woman notices first, and the thing she never forgets. If this opens something for you, there's much more to explore beneath the surface of what truly creates lasting connection. Stay close. This understanding is only the beginning.